And finally, new rule, to mark the October 7th anniversary, we must launch a campaign to educate young Americans about the Middle East. And the way I'd like to begin that process is by addressing an open letter to Chapel Roan. Now, to those viewers who aren't watching this while also looking at their phones, let me explain. Chapel Roan is not the name of one of Trump's golf courses.
Oh, here we go. Bill Maher on Real Time, diving headfirst into the Israel-Palestine conflict by calling out a pop star. And not just any pop star, Chapel Roan. Now, for those who aren't familiar, Chapel Roan is an up-and-coming queer pop artist who's made a name for herself with bold, synth-driven tracks and performances heavily influenced by drag culture. She's become something of an icon in the so-called LGBTQ letter vomit community. But she's caught Bill Maher's attention for a different reason. Chapel Roan's recent statements on the Israel-Palestine conflict, particularly her criticism of the Democratic Party's support for Israel, have ruffled some feathers. She even declined to perform at the White House's Pride celebration in protest of the Biden administration's stance on the war. And it looks like that was enough for Bill Maher to turn her into his latest target on Real Time. According to Bill Maher, people like Chapel Roan, and really her entire generation, are victims of propaganda. And what's that propaganda? Apparently, it's the fact that they don't enjoy watching innocent women and children get eliminated from this world. Yeah, that's what we're calling indoctrination now, feeling empathy for civilian casualties. Bill Maher really seems to think Chapel Roan and her generation are completely brainwashed for reacting to what they see on their screens. I mean, how dare they be moved by images of innocent children caught in the crossfire? Look, I'm all for calling out people when they're genuinely indoctrinated, but Chapel Roan feeling horrified by civilian deaths? I don't know, Bill. Doesn't really scream propaganda victim to me. Maybe this is just basic human decency. But sure, let's pin that on TikTok while we're at it. It's honestly impressive how Bill Maher can take a pop star's opinions and twist them into some grand indictment of an entire generation. Meanwhile, here on Real Time, we're supposed to believe that reacting to the deaths of women and children means you've fallen for propaganda.
She's actually a great new recording artist who, like a Hezbollah pager, is really blowing up. In just a few months, she went from a struggling artist to getting 3 billion plays on Spotify, netting her almost 11 cents. But here's what caught my eye. She seems like a Gen Zer who can be reached, because I saw her on TMZ say,
obviously, fuck the policies of the right, but also fuck some of the policies on the left.
That sounds like something I would say. She also said, I think it's important that people use critical thinking. I think it's important for me to question myself, question my algorithm, question, is some person that tweeted something about someone else even true? Preach, queer ally, preach. But to Israel and Chapel, this is where we must put to the test your pledge to use critical thinking and to question whether what you're reading on social media is true, because it isn't. There's a whole history of the Middle East that you and your fans aren't hearing about. So why don't you let me be your spirit guide through this?
Yes, Bill Maher, the self-appointed spirit guide of the TikTok generation, here to show Chapel Roan the light. Because who better to help us navigate the Israel-Palestine conflict than someone who seems to think TikTok is the source of all misinformation? It's honestly impressive how confidently Maher steps into this role as if he's the sole gatekeeper of knowledge on the Middle East. He's literally saying, sit down, Roan, let me guide you through centuries of history. If that's not a masterclass in condescension, I don't know what is. Now, while Maher is busy talking down to Chapel Roan, let's not ignore the fact that the Israel-Palestine conflict didn't just pop up overnight. If we really want to dive into centuries of history, why not bring up the Six-Day War of 1967? You know, the war where Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip, territories that remain at the heart of the conflict to this day. That war reshaped the entire region, deepening tensions and setting the stage for decades of unrest. But sure, Bill Maher wants us to believe it's as simple as him being the spirit guide for the youth who don't know any better. And the best part, he's doing this while calling out Chapel Roan, a pop star, for daring to voice an opinion on one of the most complex conflicts in history. He's treating her like she's just some clueless kid, as if her thoughts on the Israel-Palestine conflict can't possibly have any weight because, what? She's young, she's queer, she's on TikTok. Chapel Roan never said anything outrageous and negative of citizens of that country over there that seems to run all aspects of American culture. Yet Maher is in the middle of an 8-minute rant against her like she had some out-of-line opinion. Maybe I'm missing something here. If you've got thoughts on Maher's sudden leap into spiritual mentorship, especially over a pop star like Chapel Roan, let me know in the comments. Your engagement helps the channel grow, and I'm genuinely curious if anyone's buying this spirit guide act. Go ahead, hit up those comments.
Before I do, let me tell you a little about myself, since you may have no idea who I am, considering that when this show went on the air, you were barely old enough to be told you were in the wrong body. So, my name is Bill Maher. I'm 35. I've been to all of Diddy's freak-off parties, and I work at the same place as Euphoria. In fact, she's right down the hall. My TikTok handle is BeNasty, and I go live every Friday night with the anime filter on. And I once won a smoke-off against Willie Nelson, Woody Harrelson, and Snoop. Okay, that one's true. But no, look, truth be told, I'm a baby boomer. I remember phone booths and cars with ashtrays and vaginal sex. And I didn't learn about the Middle East from TikTok, which is a Chinese company whose totalitarian government would just love to have America's youth hating America. That's some of that algorithm stuff you say you want to look into. Now, first off, the fact that you don't know much history isn't your fault. You live in the United States, where the schools stopped doing that whole teaching facts thing a while ago. But getting all your history from TikTok is like getting all your calories from Hostess. I know you're moved by what you see on there. We all are, the dead Palestinian bodies. But it's odd that your generation didn't seem nearly as moved by the Jewish bodies on October 7th. You killed at Coachella this year, but when Hamas kills at a music festival, it's a whole other thing. Doesn't the sight of so many young women raped at a music festival make it a little personal?
And there it is, the classic Bill Maher move. He's really out here telling us that Chapel Roan and her generation just don't feel enough for the Jewish victims of the October 7th attacks. But hey, those Palestinian children, caring about Palestinians, that's where their hearts are misguided. This is Real Time with Bill Maher, where selective empathy becomes an art form. Maher's whole argument hinges on the idea that people like Chapel Roan, and by extension, Gen Z, are emotionally bankrupt for caring about the suffering they see on their screens. But what's even more wild is the way he paints them as heartless for not reacting enough to Jewish victims, as if you can't be horrified by both sides suffering. It's wild how Real Time turns into this moral high ground where Maher gets to define how we're supposed to feel. But here's a newsflash. You can care about all civilian lives regardless of which side they're on. The fact that Chapel Roan has the guts to speak out against the deaths of Palestinian women and children doesn't make her misguided. It makes her human. We'll dive even deeper into Bill Maher's mental gymnastics, but honestly, if this is where he's going with it, I can only imagine what's next. Stay tuned.
My guess is that Gen Z hearts are hardened by the propaganda you see on TikTok, which likes to call the Jews colonizers. But colonizers are intruders who have no history in an area, like when Spain conquered the Mayans, or when your mom took over Facebook. When the Dutch took over South Africa, they had no history to the land. They just wanted it. But Israel is the Jews' homeland, and Jews have always lived there. I cap you not. You can look it up. It's in this book called The Bible, which is horribly wrong about sex ed, slavery, science, and cooking, but the archaeology checks out. It says the Jews built a temple with a really big wall 7 centuries before Muhammad or Islam ever existed, and sure as shit, you can still go there and touch it. Calling Jews colonizers in Israel is like calling Native Americans here. It's ridiculous. Chapel, did you know that for 2,000 years, Palestine was like an Uber driver with a 3-star rating? Nobody wanted it. And there was never any Arab country called Palestine. It was an orphan province. And if you ask people what they thought about it back then, they'd say it gave them the ick. But after World War II, and after the Jews were very nearly wiped out by an actual attempted genocide, they decided that it was time for their historic homeland to be an actual country, so that for once they could defend themselves. And the UN, we like them, right? Yeah, they agreed and voted a country for each of the indigenous peoples. One side agreed to that, but the Arabs had a slightly different proposal. They said, how about we keep it all and wipe you out? Chappell, if you think it was repressive growing up queer in the Midwest, try the Mideast. You're a female drag queen, and you sing, I fucked you in the bathroom when we went to dinner, your parents at the table. Yeah, that wouldn't fly in Gaza, although you would straight off a roof. The same goes for knee-deep on the passenger seat and you're eating me out. Yeah, my guess is the morality police would figure out that one's not about the drive-thru and kill your feather boa-wearing ass. You know when you sing that LA is where boys and girls can all be queens every single day? You're welcome, but offer not good in the West Bank. Chappell, you're not wrong that oppression is bad, or that Palestinian and many other Muslim populations are oppressed and deserve to be freed. You just have it completely ass backwards as to who is doing the oppressing. Hamas is a terrorist mafia that took over Gaza. The Revolutionary Guard is a terrorist mafia that took over Iran. ISIS is a terrorist mafia that took over Iraq. The Taliban is a terrorist mafia that took over Afghanistan. These are the oppressors. And when you make it all about Israel, you take the pressure off of them. You enable them. The Iranian regime has killed 600 protesters after a 22-year-old woman died in police custody following her arrest for the crime of wearing her head covering incorrectly. Just to be clear, that's your team. Iran is who sponsors Hamas and Hezbollah. Are you sure this is who you want to throw down with? Meryl Streep spoke at the UN recently and said this about the Taliban, who are only slightly more conservative than your heroes in Hamas. She said, today in Kabul, a female cat has more freedoms than a woman. A cat may go sit on her front stoop and feel the sun on her face. She may chase a squirrel into the park. A squirrel has more rights than a girl in Afghanistan today. A bird may sing in Kabul, but a girl may not. You're a singer, and you're advocating for a place and a culture you would never want to live under. Gender may not be binary, but right and wrong kind of is.
And so Bill Maher wraps up on Real Time, acting like he's just delivered the ultimate history lesson. But let's not forget, we're getting religious claims from a Jewish atheist who literally made a movie mocking faith. So let me get this straight. God gave the Jews Palestine, but the Bible is completely wrong about everything else. Interesting logic, Bill. Maher seems to cherry pick whatever fits his argument when it comes to the Middle East. Now, if we want to talk about who gave what to whom, let's not pretend the history of Israel is some clear-cut story that started with divine intervention. We've got to go all the way back to things like the Balfour Declaration of 1917, when Britain promised a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while conveniently ignoring the Arab population already living there. Fast forward to the aftermath of World War II, and you've got the establishment of Israel in 1948, backed by the United Nations, after 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Of course, we can't forget that this decision led to wars, displacement, and decades of tension. But sure, let's just chalk it up to God handing over the deed. Then there's the queers for Palestine angle. Did Chapel Roan ever say she's moving to the Middle East, or even declare herself part of Queers for Palestine? No. She criticized the Democratic Party for backing Israel's war against Hamas, a stance that led her to protest by skipping a White House Pride performance. Whether or not you agree with her, at least she's standing by her beliefs, even when it's not the easy choice. Meanwhile, Maher is over here positioning himself as the expert, ready to guide us all through the truth about the conflict. But somehow he keeps selectively weaving history, religion, and morality to serve his own narrative. If you want to actually hear what Chapel Roan has to say about her views without the Bill Maher filter, check out this video where she discusses her thoughts on Palestine, the Democratic Party, and her journey as a queer artist. Let's hear her side for a change.